Come on, Soda Pop, let's go.
Alright. Well, so how long have you lived in Sioux Falls?
I moved here 30 years ago.
Okay, so 85?
Yep.
And you grew up down by Harrisburg?
No,
Harrisburg?
I have moved over 40 times in my life.
Wow.
I have lived in 19 states,
Wow.
and
Where were you born? Harrisburg?
actually in Vermilion.
Vermilion?
But we moved a few days after I was born. So,
Why did you move so much? Military? Or?
no, my father was a defense contractor back in the heyday of the Cold War. And growing up, had no idea what he did for a living. All I knew is he was an engineer. So I remember one time when we were living in the Twin Cities, there was a train that would go past our house. And I'd run out there to see if Dad was driving it, because that was the only kind of engineers I understood as a little kid, you know. So.
Yeah. Interesting.
So
when did you find out what he really did?
About 5 years ago.
Oh, really?
I was talking with my dad one day on the phone, and he happened to mention moving to Florida, and I said, "Stop it. Why did we move to Florida?" "Well, I can't tell you." "Dad, why can't you tell me?" "I signed some papers, I can't tell you." "Dad, you're 85 years old and you're on air accept. Nobody's gonna put you in jail for telling your kid what you did 50 years ago."
So you finally spilled the beans.
So, and then he told me the story of being called up when we were in Minneapolis, or no, we were in Milwaukee. And we had 120 inches of snow. We had a big snowdrift going over our house. It was the worst lake effect winter they'd had ever recorded. And where he used to have to go out and cut holes in the snowdrift so we would have light in our house. It was that much snow. And so anyway, he was fed up, and he got a call from one of his compadres in the job shopping world. That's what consultants were called in those days. There were about 1,500 of these individuals who could get a phone call in the middle of the night and say, "We need you in Cheyenne Mountain," or "We need you in New York," or "We need you in Taos, New Mexico," and you would pack up and leave. In fact, he had a small airplane for a part of his career so he could fly to these jobs and do them, and we wouldn't have to move. So anyway, he was called down to go to Cape Canaveral, and he proceeded to tell me the story of he and a friend of his, Chuck Geeting. Chuck, Charles Geeting, but we always called him Chuck. Anyway, Chuck and Dad were brought back together for a project down there for Werner von Braun. And he and my dad compiled the launch codes for the Mercury space launch. And then he was in...
Compiled the space codes?
The launch codes.
The launch code?
Yeah. What happens so they were brought into this room that had about the size of a 2-car garage, he told me. In the second floor of this old metal building with no air conditioning, and they were brought in, and they walked in the room not knowing what they were brought there for, but they kind of knew, they had a skill, so they kind of knew something was going on. So anyway, they were brought in, and he said there were just stacks of paper going around the room and a table out in the middle of the room. And they had to decide what those stacks of paper were, because the people that showed them into the room couldn't tell them why they were there. They didn't have clearance. My dad and Chuck had higher clearance than the guys that brought them into the room. And it turns out Dad and Chuck also did the launch codes for the Explorer 1 satellite, the America's first satellite that went up 3 weeks after Sputnik. They also did the launch codes for the X-15 project, for nuclear missiles to be shot out of submarines.
That's what the X-15 is?
X-15 was the rocket ship plane that flew to the edge of space before, that was the highest man had ever been, was being launched off of a B-52. And so,
I mean, this is back in the
50s.
50s.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So was he a stereotypical, white collared shirt, black frame
Nope.
glasses?
Nope.
To describe him to me? Obviously as a young
You've seen me when I go to city council meetings, and that's the way he would go to work.
Okay.
And then he would go to work at IBM when he was also involved in the first IBM computer.
Jeez.
And he hated that job because everybody around him was wearing suits and ties and the white shirts, and everything was, you couldn't roll up your sleeves. And so my dad went in the loudest sport coat that he could find, and the wildest tie, and colored shirts, and just to irritate the employees, because he was a consultant, he could go any way he wanted.
Right.
And they needed his skill, so he didn't care. And he was a systems analyst and expert in wiring and vacuum tubes and all those things that were needed in those days, and he was an expert in it. So, and he was a farm kid from Vermilion.
Wow. Well, it sounds like, so the nut doesn't fall far from the tree. It sounds like you have a lot in common.
Well, once I had this talk with him, it finally made sense to me several years ago when I was working on a project, and I worked 11 straight days, 24 hours a day, just leaving long enough to go change and get something to eat. I ended up, because I had to babysit all these computers on this project, and got it all done, and I was just mentally exhausted from that pressure I was under, and I'd found a rather substantial bank fraud, and anyway, I was going in this project, and I got done with it, and I called my dad because he kept calling to see how I was doing, and something about it fascinated him, and I didn't understand it at the time. And he made a comment, and I'll never forget this comment. He goes, "Do you remember when I made the model airplane?" And I knew exactly what he was talking about, because as a kid I was trying to figure out, why is my dad sitting here in the dining room, where we lived in New York at the time, building this wooden airplane. He wasn't going to work, he wasn't doing anything, but he took a couple weeks to build this model airplane. It's like, I don't, so it didn't make any sense. The moment he said that, he said then, when I told him, he says, "Did you feel a little funny?" And it was like, everything about that time period of my life crystallized at that moment, because I understood what he was talking about. And later he told me that he was actually, deciding whether to take on heading up the lunar module project for Grumman. Just a little project.
Yeah.
A very little consequence, It's like, and so he was.
You being sarcastic.
Yeah. It's so it was absolutely fascinating to, at that moment, about 15 years ago, he said everything that I needed to know about that time in his life, because I already knew he wouldn't tell me anything more. But I knew up to that point, that's why he was. So we take the airplane out, my brother and dad and I, we take it out to near the Grumman field that we lived by, and he takes the plane up, and the plane goes up like this, and immediately goes like that, and it crashes into the ground. And all he said at the end is, "We're moving to South Dakota." And that was, Dan and I just kind of like, I don't know what that means, but we moved to South Dakota a few weeks later.
Weird.
And what was happening was, he was deciding whether to go to work at Bethpage, New York, or to come back to South Dakota.
So if the plane would have
Flown,
he would have stayed or gone to the
I'm assuming so. He never told me the rest of that part of it, but putting it together began to be that thing where, okay, he's now decided that if the plane crashed, he didn't want to be part of what was happening with the moon. He was tired. He was exhausted. He was completely. We had moved 22 times in the first 11 years of my life, and he had had more jobs than that during that time period. So he was on the go, working upwards of 20. Sometimes he worked 30 hours in a stretch, whatever the deadlines were. But he was known for being able to do that, and so he would work 5,000 hours a year. I mean, that's a lot of hours. When you have a normal work is considered 2,100 hours, and he would work 2 to 2.5 times the amount of hours.
What was his name?
Glenn, with one N.
Is he still alive?
No, he died 3 years ago.
Sorry to hear that.
But it was fun. I got to sit down with him and his best friend in the programming world, a man that was involved in he was one of the co-inventors of the CAT scan machine, and he was involved in the transistor projects and with Western Electric. So he was with a lot of really high-powered people, and
he ran with.
But these guys could not talk. Jim's desk is over here, he said, at one of their projects, on the Explorer 1 project. And so Jim's desk is across the room from him. Dad's desk is here. And they never knew until I brought them together in the kitchen that day to find out what they actually did at their separate desks. They never felt like they could talk about it. And that's how, when people talk about how secrets can be held, these guys knew it. And I was always impressed with that.
So, what about your mother? Was she around?
Oh yeah, but Mom knew nothing.
Yeah.
Dad never told Mom what he did.
They were married. They're never divorced or anything.
Oh no, they're 8 kids, and
what was her name?
Catherine with a C.
She's still around?
Oh yeah.
Okay. You said 8 kids?
Yeah.
So you have 7 brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I have a brother and 6 sisters.
Wow.
So we moved. We had
around here? Or?
No, just my brother, my youngest sister, and I live here, and then the rest of them. Well, one is deceased, and then the other 4 sisters live around the United States.
Okay. So 7 of you kids are still around?
Yep.
Okay.
My dad grew up on a homestead that my great-grandparents homesteaded in 1868.
Wow.
So when Dad came back here, he invented the heated pressure washer.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Every heated pressure washer built in this world is piggybacked off of my father's work in 1965.
Well, he's a pretty distinguished person then.
He never talked about any of it.
Very humble then too.
Well, he was a blowhard in a lot of ways, but he didn't brag about what he did, and he was always embarrassed by anybody trying to say that he did something. He was very Scandinavian. If you ever want to understand, this is something that you might find interesting. If you ever want to understand the psyche of South Dakotans and Scandinavians that moved here in the pre-1930. Go read the Law of Yente, Jante, the Law of Yente, and do a wiki on it. It's fascinating. You will get an insight into the psyche of Northern Europeans and Scandinavians. It was actually a Danish joke, but it is what makes Scandinavians what they, it's kind of an encapsulation. It's the 10 laws of being Scandinavian, pre-1930, and then it's a joke in Europe, and it's gospel in America, and people don't even know it. And in my my studies of South Dakota, going to USD, I had some great teachers, and they would talk about these things, but it was never encapsulated into a
curriculum or anything.
Yeah, but I had some South Dakota literature, and you know, I was trying to understand what makes South Dakota, because I didn't grow up here, and I didn't understand South Dakota. I still don't understand South Dakota, but it was reminded of this thing.
You're trying to figure out the psyche or what makes people here tick. Kind of.
Yeah, the political background. You know,
when you say you still don't understand South Dakota, what don't you understand about it? Just our closed nature, our shitty open record laws.
Yeah, that whole thing. We're not supposed to. We're not supposed to ask too many questions. We're not supposed to question authority. We're not supposed to feel better than, you know, that we're any better than you, and you know, we're never to be as good as somebody else. And so when I'm asking questions, I am stretching the limits of this unwritten law, that I'm being a pain in the butt because I am questioning something. What makes you any better than me, and why are you asking these questions? Well, you go back into this, and one of the things that I remember a college professor saying, you know, over 40 years ago was, you know, they have all these flim-flam artists that come to South Dakota and get sucked in by all of these wild, great projects and expenditures of money, and they steal all our money, and then when these people leave the state, we go, what happened? Why would they do that to us? So then we become suspicious again. And then we go further into the hole. I mean, we can go back to 1920 when South Dakota, under Peter Norbeck, tried to solve the farm crisis that was happening at the time. And South Dakota went out and borrowed a whole bunch of money to finance farmers to keep them going. And it put South Dakota into bankruptcy until 1957. We didn't have paved roads in South Dakota until 1957 because we had no money. And we had no way to come back to life. And it wasn't until the big dam projects, Francis Case and the work that he was doing, part of his involvement with the federal highway program and its creation for the interstate highways was to get roads in South Dakota. And so they figured out a way to help finance infrastructure in South Dakota, and we began to grow. By that time, we had all the banks had failed in the 1930s. Only one bank in the entire state of South Dakota paid off all of its indebtedness from the crash and the closure of the banks in 1933. And that's how little money South Dakota had during that time period. And I can remember as a kid driving from, you know, going to the Black Hills for the first time and riding on gravel roads to the Black Hills.
The whole way there?
Yeah, most of the way there was on gravel roads.
Wow, took a while then.
Yeah, because that's what we had to drive on.
Right. You know a lot of stuff, Bruce. Do you, well, before we get into, I still want to know a little bit more about your background. Have you ever been married?
No.
Ever gonna get married?
No.
No desire?
No.
No kids?
No.
Nothing like that. Why not? Just not interested? I mean, you look pretty young for 62. It's probably because you've never been married.
Oh, it's been close a few times. It just didn't have any, you know, it just didn't work out. So you just, and I've moved a lot, and it's just like, I get, you know, I was bored. I did a bunch of consulting work through the 80s, and that put me on the road all the time. And all I ever wanted to do as I was growing up was travel. So I traveled a lot.
This hasn't been a priority for you. I mean,
no.
So.
No, I thought it, you know, when you're growing up, you think it is, and then you realize you're not happy, and that's another one of those weird things that happens, is some things you just set aside and say you don't care. Mm-hmm. And I've met a lot of fascinating people in my life that just, you know, wow. you could do this and you can do that if you're willing to just take a gamble. And you always think, well, at some point, maybe you'll settle down, maybe you'll do this, maybe you'll do that, but it was never a priority, so.
Well, if you knew the morning I had, you'd probably be even more reaffirmed in your position. Came home from work the other night, and my wife bought a freaking German Shepherd without consulting me or anything. So,
One of the reasons why I went off totally and completely on my own 30-some years ago was you end up having, you're trying to build a business and you're trying to do things, and you realize you have no control over anything, and it's making you very unhappy. And so,
yeah.
Now when I make a mistake, it's me. I'm sorry, it's me. I had nobody to bounce this off of anymore. I've had amazing friends and relationships of all different sorts through the years that give me sounding walls for doing things. And I think that's more important than anything at a point.
Yeah.
And but I, still, what can you do? You just don't care about certain things after a while. And
you say you like to be in control. Obviously, you like to take.
I'm in
you
control
like to have
of me.
ownership
Yeah.
of what's going on. Not to say that you're in control.
I'm not a control freak. I don't believe I'm a control freak. If I do consulting work, so I walk into situations where I have no control over it, and you say, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I gave you my best advice. We tried to do this. If you want to do this, then wonderful. If not, there's other projects.
Right.
So in showing how that fits into what I do in city politics is, I can point to things we've done over the last 3 years that have changed situations in Sioux Falls, and actually in the state of South Dakota. And what's fascinating about this is when given a chance to have information, we can make major changes. And we can correct things. We can find scandals. We can dig things out. I'm a data miner. I do digging into millions of data records to get answers. And it's easy to do for somebody like me. I don't know why.
Were you good at math growing up?
No, not at all.
Really?
No.
Statistics?
I took 5 statistics courses in college, and I basically learned the same thing in each one, and it was like one just drilled it into the next and the next, to the point where I did take a class called quantitative analysis.
Did that challenge you more than the stats classes?
I didn't understand it at all, but I had to take the class.
Yeah.
And there was one project that we had to do in this class. And Dr. Powell from Vermillion taught the class. And there were about 35 MBAs, JDs, students in there. It was all post-grad. And we're all sitting in this class. And 33 of them decided that this is an open book test and we have study groups, and because it's really an involved, complicated process, and quantitative analysis is taking data and stacking data that's dissimilar, but finding a way to tie it all back together so you can study, say, take 5 polls like Quinnipiac and Gannett will have a poll, and you'll take all this information and you'll find strains through this whole process that can set a trend.
Okay.
It's 538.com. What Nate Silver does.
Yeah.
It's looking at things that are supposed to be dissimilar. And so anyway, this one young woman and I were kicked out of our study groups because we disagreed with what they were, what these people were doing. And so they had the herd mentality that this is the way to do it, and they went after it. And they went their way, and she and I somehow met up, and we were talking about it. She goes, "What? That's exactly what I'm thinking." And so we sat and we solved the problem the way we thought it needed to be done. Well, 33 in the class failed the test and 2 aced the test. And when he passed the tests out that day, he looked at me and started laughing because I was the nerd that didn't understand anything that was going on. So I was in the study, they would have these study groups in the afternoon and stuff that you could, go to the professor's office. Yeah, and I was there constantly because I had no idea what they were talking about. But what I ended up thinking about it later is they were giving me rules. And there were, you take this rule and this rule and this rule, and you had to build it back from each of the rules. So what that was looking at it from a systems perspective. So that in order to do this, you have to essentially ask these basic questions, and then from those basic questions, solve each step. And that's what she and I did, and we aced that test, and totally shocked everybody because we were the 2 theoretical dumbest ones in the class.
The ones struggling or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's what problem solving is.
Using different ways to go about things.
Yeah, well, just asking the basic questions and solving things from the basic information. Which fits back into, what I'm doing with the state, what I've been doing with the city.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what would you say? You said you've made some impactful efforts in the city government and even the state. So, I mean, what are some examples? I mean, election reform, obviously.
Well, the things that we did with the election review committee. My debriefing document that I put together after last November's election solved a lot of problems for the state of South Dakota in the voting process. Well, we created a more structured process. We actually have instructions now on, people had never gotten together to talk about the minutia of how to tabulate ballots. We talked about problems in the state's databases. And we found that that individuals were actually changing data in the database. They called it the same but different.
What's the name of that database?
That's the total vote.
Total vote, yeah.
I'm very proud of what we did as a group. There were 7 of us that worked, that brought a lot of information to the table. I learned a tremendous amount personally from it, and I was amazed at the depth of interest and excitement about the process that all of these individuals have.
Mm-hmm. So, if I wanted to explain to people how things are done differently now than they were before before the election review committee, in layman's terms, how do you explain that?
Well,
they're just more diligent, or
we found out it was the project. I'll say this up front. The work we were doing was not to save anybody's butt in any way, shape, or form, nor was it to indict anybody. When we put together our first meeting, and then we put together the agendas, it was to get to the root of the issues and to analyze what worked and what didn't work.
So only time will tell, though.
Exactly. We've only had 1 election. That was a school board election, which was fantastic. I mean, we went in on that school election this past year, and it wasn't a huge turnout, but it was a good turnout. It was the
late start.
The late start was in there. If it would have just been a school board election, we might have had 800 people show up. Mm-hmm. But because of the late start, it was a good test. There were a lot of people voting who normally wouldn't vote. So it gave us this wonderful chance to go in and establish the process. And we helped Bob Litz redesign the process. and to lay things out so that me as an election judge, which I've been several times, can sit there and actually audit the machines as they're running. I can look at the ballots much easier, make sure that things are running through the machines properly. That audit is a big concern. And you'll hear me say the word audit in the event center siding issue and the event center in general. The swimming pool, there's all these projects the city does. We're talking audits. Now you're looking even at what's happening out in Platte and what's happening with EB5 and the Secretary of State's office. And you can go through all of these different things that are now becoming scandals. Well, they were scandals all along. The only reason why nobody knew anything about it is somebody finally asked for an audit. Chantel Krebs, seeing a mess, apparently asked for an audit of the office so she wouldn't get blamed for the problems once she started operating the office. And I think it was an excellent thing for her to do. It puts the burden back on the previous office holders.
Yeah.
And so what I'm asking, and what I've been doing the last 3 years since I've gotten involved in questioning things at City Hall, is you tell me it's this, and then you tell me it's this. Which is it? Why can we do this? When I took the mayor to ethics board for using the city funds, the city resources to run his election campaign, and I ran into the problems with members of the Board of Ethics that I actually fired is now sitting in judgment for what I'm putting before the mayor. I'm bringing the mayor to the ethics board, and here is somebody that I terminated employment 30 some years ago, and now he's in judgment of me and he doesn't remember me. Very strange. And that really bothers me to this day. That man should have recused himself. And then to find out the city attorney steps down from his official function as the city attorney for the ethics board, and he then becomes the personal defender of the mayor in front of the ethics board, when Mike Huther decides to go have a radio interview here in town when he should have been at the ethics board. I didn't set the schedules for any of this. The mayor should have been at that ethics board. And by him not being at that ethics board shows me that he felt himself guilty and did not want to be put on the spot.
Explain to me how he was using city funds for campaigning. Walk me through that.
He was using city meetings, creating props. He was having the city staff create props so that he could use them in meetings. He was using the city's State of the City address as a campaign platform, when normally that particular speech was given after the election. He used it before the election.
Yeah.
So he was using it as a campaign platform to give his campaign speech, which is all he gave. When you go out and listen to that speech, it's the same speech he gave all through the campaign. And he had the press there, and he put it up on the city's website. So this is a use of city resources to campaign, which is in violation of our charter and state law.
Ethics board didn't agree.
That's right.
So.
Yep. They were all people who had been donors or supporters of the mayor.
Because he gets to handpick that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something that I would like to see changed.
So that's another issue. What are some of your other issues you've worked on and seen change?
Well, we
I
have
know you got a lot of things up your sleeve, but I mean, what have you? Like election review committee. I mean, only time will tell if what you guys have pointed out helps Bob. you know.
Well, it isn't just helping Bob, but it's, we can look at what we
If
did.
you can get the votes counted within, you know, if it doesn't take him 16 hours to count
Yep.
the votes, then obviously we're making some progress.
Yep. Well, he now has a third machine.
Yep.
And he now understands by having essentially 3 auditors in the room, county auditors, who retired, and we also had Julie Pearson from Rapid City, who did a great job looking at the situation and going, flow. And she understood the flow so well from 30 years of doing it in Rapid City that she could look at it and say, oh, you know, you could do this, this, and this. So it was fantastic. Then we had Bob, you know, and his staff in and out of the room, and being able to have the discussion between all of these people. And we actually even had Marilyn from, I think it was her name, the new auditor in Lincoln County. She was able to come to some of the meetings and see what we were talking about, which I think was fantastic that we got all these people. We ended up having 21 county auditors write complaints about the process. Nobody had ever done that. And they sent in blind comments, so I have no idea where any of these comments came from. And they actually allowed us to see the frustrations throughout the state of South Dakota. And then when we got down to it and we started going through the total vote system and seeing there's some issues there that I still would like to explore deeper. But we discovered that the total vote system is actually being sold to several other states right now. And in what we were able to correct and to point to corrections needing to be made through our committee, probably we're talking about millions of people being able to guarantee that their registration is still in the drawer so that when they go to vote, they can vote. We found a whole series of mistakes in that process. And it was a wonderful process to go through and point out and to finally get some satisfaction that things were going to be fixed. So if you go talk to Bob Litz right now, and you will ask him, and he told me this again the other day, he said, you know, he's talking about the responsiveness of the Secretary of State's office and of the programmers to get things right. And because they don't ever want to be put in that spot again.
Right.
And that was just, as I listened to the excuses of Jason Gant right now, it's like, you people didn't even learn a lesson in this. You should have understood through all of this that there was audits that were necessary. What I was asking for in the election review committee was, what is the audit process? They broke state law in the way that they modified data at the Secretary of State's office, the programmers did. They broke state and possibly federal law. And our county auditor, or the one, you know, the county auditor in Chamberlain, or, you know, in Gan Valley, they had no way to go in and actually audit the data that was being changed in peer. They legally in peer cannot change any voter data. The only place
the local auditors can't verify if they're doing that or not.
Exactly. And what I was able to show through some data work that I did was show how they had changed thousands of records. And there's supposed to be safeguards put into place, but I haven't seen them yet, but I'm told that there's more safeguards in place now. I would really like to see those changes and see if they meet, you know, the way I look at data. I don't use any big fancy programs to look at data.
So other highlights. I mean, I don't want to get too bogged
Yeah. You can tell I'm passionate about voting. I registered to vote within days of South Dakota allowing 17-year-olds to register to vote. And I still remember that. And I was very proud of being able to go register to vote. It's been one of those.
What year was that? I suppose I could do the math.
71.
'Cause before you had to wait till you were 18?
Well, no, 21.
21, okay. Because I think people who are interested in politics at a young age.
Well, I actually was a pen pal of George McGovern's starting about 1966 or
Really?
67.
Do you think he really wrote the letters back to you?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. My father told the story of a trip he made to Washington D.C. to try and get some help on something, and he was doing a sales trip. So he went up to George McGovern's office, and he walked in the door, and he introduced himself and wanted to see the senator and talk to him for a minute. And George was very open to people coming. So anyway, he gets brought into George's office, and Dad has a salesman with him, and so the two of them go in to see George, and he introduces himself to George, and he goes, Danielson, do you know a Bruce Danielson? And it's like, that's when we knew that George knew who I was. And then through the years, back in that time period, when George would be doing his little tours of South Dakota, I would go there, and George would always greet me very warmly, and in fact, I was brought up on the stage in Elk Point because they'd heard I was in the audience, and George sent somebody who became a very good friend out to search for me and find me, and that's the first time I met John Murphy from Elk Point. So,
what year was that?
1968.
Okay. Is that why you're still a Democrat today?
I was
You're upgrading? You're a Democrat, right?
Oh yeah. Not as proud a Democrat as I was in the early days, but
Why do you say that?
well, I've always had probably equal number of friends and political allies that were Republican as Democrat, and I just think that both parties are screwing things up royally, and so I have found that I just need to do my own thing, because that's just me, you know. Without getting too deep into it, I think politics needs to be people-based, and I find that most American politics now is very corporatist-based, and so I'm an old-fashioned Democrat. I was brought up as a people's Democrat. I grew up at kitchen tables of both sets of grandparents who were, you know, Roosevelt and Truman Democrats.
Well, Mayor Mike Uther's a Democrat.
He's a corporatist.
Explain it.
Well,
What about
you can put a label on anything.
Mm-hmm.
You can claim to be one party or another. It's like being a DLC Democrat. DLC Democrat is a Democratic leadership, and that was a committee that was formed with Al Gore and Bill Clinton back in the 1990s to take 1980, I think late 1980s, to take control of the Democratic Party away from the activists. And I've always been on the activist side of it. So
So you haven't had a lot of Republican or Democrat role models in the last 25 years.
No.
Was McGovern your favorite Democrat of all time, or?
No, I've had several. I actually worked on the congressional staff for a short time, and while I was going to college, and I worked on several campaigns with Frank Denholm. I just loved the man. I mean, he gave me opportunities, and I think of him often, and it's, you know, he was one of those people. He went to Washington. Larry Pressler defeated him in 1974. I could point to reasons why the campaign that year, he was one of 3 Democrats that lost that year in the incumbents, that is. and it really hurt. I think if Frank had won and I had followed through on some of my education plans that were going to follow that election, my life would be very different today. But things change in life and you just kind of adjust and you move on. But Frank allowed me a chance to attend the Watergate trial.
Really?
I sat in the front row. I got to meet Judge Sirica, very proud of that. I got to watch what seemed at the time incredibly boring testimony. And I didn't understand it at the time because I was just a kid.
I mean, how old are we talking?
19.
Okay. Teenager.
Yeah. And let's see. I might have turned, I was 20 right then.
Okay.
So anyway, I was in college. I took the time. I didn't even know you could do internships or anything. I just took the time and left school and went out there and then tried to make it up later. Because I had this opportunity and I just shut down everything and left.
Okay.
And so I went, got to see Nelson Rockefeller sworn in as vice president. Because Frank was a former FBI agent, I got this amazing tour of the old FBI headquarters. And I got to party at the Watergate. There were just a whole lot of things I got to do in this whole time period. And still, I met some amazing congressmen and former congressmen, senators. I was invited into dinners, and I can tell you a whole bunch of people I met. You probably wouldn't know who any of them are, but in my life, they were people that were very strong convictions, had plans of what they wanted to do with this world. That I still think a lot of them had good ideas. Some of them I met that I even to this day question what their motives were. But what it does is it gives you this background that allows you to ask questions.
It gives you the know-how, the information you need to ask questions, or the confidence to ask questions. Can you explain that a little
Well,
bit more?
I was working in Kentucky in 1974. And so when I got done with that project, that job I had for the summer, I ended up going to Washington, D.C. And I'm, sitting having a meal one day, and Frank is sitting there with members of this one committee. And Frank was very involved with George McGovern with the food stamp program, the Ag Committee. So this is a group of congressmen that are part of the Ag Committee. And Frank just invited me along. Hey, you want to go to lunch in the House restaurant? Sure. I'll go anywhere. So anyway, he takes me there, and we sit down, and there's this big group of people sitting there, and they're talking about the food stamp program. And it's like, and then they start talking about, they're kind of curious why I'm sitting there. And so I started telling them what's going on. Well, I had just been in Kentucky where the epicenter of the national coal strike of 1974 was happening, was right where I was living. I had to drive through the shotguns every day.
Wow.
And so we started talking about it, and all these people, all of a sudden the whole table got quiet, and they started listening to this kid from South Dakota talk about poverty in Appalachia and the way the food stamp program was working. And these people were getting ready to vote on this thing, and they were listening to me. And it wasn't in a hearing, it wasn't anywhere else, but I ended up shaping some thoughts. And then they would pull me aside and they talked to me, and it was like, and Frank just stood back and he just watched the whole thing. It was just, and I didn't grasp the magnitude of it for a long time. I just thought it was pretty cool. They actually wanted to listen to this kid from South Dakota. And I was able to tell them things that they had never heard before.
So so you think Frank kind of knew what he was doing by bringing you there then?
Well, Frank had this ability to, if you knew something, he'd shut up and listen. And he was an FBI agent. So and you know, you look back on it and he's actually gathering data. And if somebody's talking freely, kind of like we're doing right now, you're gathering data. Well, that's what he was doing. And so he was building whatever case he needed to get the job done that needed to be done.
And that's
And you know, it's a head trip now when I think about it. At that time, it was just like, well, this is kind of interesting. I didn't know all the games that were being played in the background, but I was adding to the dialogue and helping these people vote. And several years later, I was in Minneapolis meeting with a group, and I was there with a couple of congressmen from Minnesota, a Republican and a Democrat, and even Rudy Bostrowitz was in the room. He was senator at the time, and we ended up talking about advocacy for handicapped people, because I have a disabled sister. And you know, so you start shaping their thought process because you went in the room and asked a question.
right.
And that's kind of something that I've done all along the way. I like to ask questions.
I want to go back to the mayor. You said a corporatist.
Yes.
What about, I mean, give me some examples of some actions he's taken, or approaches to leadership that make you consider him a corporatist. I mean, obviously.
Well, his financial backers, for one thing. His attitude about this is the strong mayor form of government in Sioux Falls is a very corporatist, elitist way to look at city government, at any government.
Is that his Huther problem or a city of Sioux Falls problem?
Well, it's a city of Sioux Falls problem, and he's exasperated the situation. He's made it worse. In my conversations with several of the original backers of the charter from the 1994 vote, they all knew that they were building a strong mayor form of government because they got tired of the bickering that was going on back, you know, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in city government. And they were trying to establish that we have a head of government. But what this mayor has done worse than the two prior under this form of government is he has taken it as, if you do not do what I tell you to do, then I will put you out of, you know, I'll just move you out of the way. I will reward the backers of my proposals, the people that work for the city. He is rewarding with perks and salaries. You have, and you can see the trends. You see he's bringing people onto city boards that allow him to keep doing the aggressive things that he's doing.
Stacking the bench a little.
Stacking the bench.
Tell me about when you were arrested. I don't really know all the details there. I just know you were arrested and you think it was political retribution.
It was.
So walk me through all that.
Well, to go back, you know, I got the house many years ago. I've been doing a remodeling project. I took a house that should have been torn down, and I was remodeling it, making it into a style of house that I grew up with. And
How long have you been working on it?
Over 20 years.
Wow.
Since the first day I moved in the house, I never even used a kitchen cupboard. I ripped the kitchen out the day I was moving my furniture in.
Wow.
So the house was in such bad shape.
Yeah.
And so I knew it was in bad shape, and I had plans for it. And so, you know, that wasn't going to be a problem. So, and from that point on, from the first day I moved in, I started having neighbor problems. And this is what I have a problem with the way this mayor is running the city. is we now have a system of government that reminds me very much of 1984. The Orwellian using the neighbors to inflict pain onto another neighbor, using the state. You can read Orwell, and when I was actually in Sweden in 1983, and
well, let me back up. What were you arrested for? Technically, what was your charge?
maintaining common nuisance.
And that stemmed from, they say, just a constant remodel.
No, what it was is they were saying I had litter in my yard.
Okay.
And the shenanigans that the city attorney's office went through at that time period was rather astounding, and the judge, that was actually in July 2nd. These dates are kind of interesting. In July 2nd, they issued a warrant for my arrest. It was processed, and I actually went to the courthouse, and I went to the jail, and did all the things that I was supposed to do.
Is this 20?
No, this was in 2014.
Okay. So you went to
And
the
I-
house, took care of everything.
I went to, all it was a simple warrant. I was supposed to walk in the door, pick up the papers, and leave. Acknowledge that I got them. And then I would leave. It's called a PR bond. And somewhere in that whole process, according to a couple witnesses, that my bond had been changed from PR to a penny bond, which made no sense because nobody's ever heard of this before. But so anyway, they held me for 6.5 hours in jail.
What's penny bond mean?
Well, they had a token bond that had to be paid.
Right.
And so in the final paperwork, it said the clerk of court's office paid the bond, but they had me out I went in at 3 o'clock and I left at 10 o'clock that night.
So you still didn't have to pay to get out.
No,
They just said, hell.
but they held me for all these hours, for 6.5 hours, in stripes.
Do they keep you in the?
In the lockup in the holding area with the people that had and at one point for several hours I was in the room there were 19 of us in this holding room, some federal bank robbers, some down on your luck. 3 o'clock in the afternoon they got rounded up and brought to the jail when they were doing the sweeping of the city police were doing the sweeping of the drunks off of downtown. Because that's all they were saying is they were going through downtown and they got picked up, and they were the frequent travelers, as we've recently learned they're called, that get brought in on a regular basis, and they get held until they dry out, and then they're in the middle of the night they're let out after they sober up.
Yeah.
This is a city abuse of the city's jail.
We know. Just sit tight on that.
Yeah,
It's coming.
yeah.
So very soon, like
I'm a witness to it.
over the weekend.
I'm a witness to it. They told me why they were there, and I've never forgotten it. And what was real interesting is in this situation is 2 of them had met with Mayor Huther at Lyon Park just before they got arrested. And they were thanking Mayor Huther for bringing the porta pots, because he used to go down there on a regular basis and scope things out until they thought they were friends. They thought, oh, my friend, Mayor Huther, was one of them said. And so they in fact, one of the bank robbers, everybody's in the room, they're all talking back and forth, and I'm sitting there on one of the benches, and I'm not saying a thing. I'm just listening to everybody. And finally, one of the bank robbers said, "What are you here for?" And I just said, pissed off the mayor. And, and they go, wow!
That's, you'd be proud of that.
So,
It's kind of a badge of honor there.
yeah, so these are, and the reason why I firmly believe, the reason I can trace back a lot of what's happened since 2010. I've had prior to 2012, I used to have a little sheet that had tick marks on it by my door for every time a city official would show up at my house prior to that. And so I was able to calculate from all of it that I had had over 300 visits to my property since the mid-90s. That I was being harassed on a constant basis. And when this mayor took over in 2010, everything got boosted up. And it became extremely aggressive and punitive in everything this mayor was doing. Now, I happen to know part of the reason for that has to do with some blood relation of his.
That live in your neighborhood.
Yes. And I also have, during that time period, since 2010, I've actually had to file protection orders against some neighbors for the vindictiveness and the pettiness, and I've actually had a neighbor. Things have happened, let me put it that way, and it's required me to take more aggressive steps to protect myself. Well, in that whole process, I then got to meet Scott Erisman, Teresa Staley, Kermit Staggers, Dan Daly, and a bunch of other people who have had things go on with the city. And they've been advocates, or they're activists, and because I was trying to find answers as what's going wrong? Why is the city of Sioux Falls doing this? And then in that activism, I got involved in the snow gates and the four ballot measures in 2012, that led to since 2012, that led to the 2014 vote, and I have called out the city on multiple.
So that kind of spurred on your relationships with some of these other folks. But I want to, what did you do to the mayor to make, what could you have done, or what did you do that makes you think that the mayor had you arrested? I mean, I won't get into all of the specifics of this because there may be some more things unfolding on that also. But I can point to my city council public input. Okay.
To a more aggressive stance against me.
So public input, when and where and what?
Well, at city council, at the beginning of all the city council
Yeah.
meetings, there's public input, where the public can come in and talk about any topic they want to talk about. And because I had been running into all of these different issues, one of the things I called the city out on was the advocational education sessions they were doing to control the election vote prior to the 2014 city election.
You're talking about what were they advocating for?
Well, the city was illegally advocating for stopping the snow gates. They were promoting the Walmart. They were promoting Shake Places, and they were promoting an indoor pool that wasn't even on the ballot. And so they were controlling in a 2-hour program the city election of 2014. The city spent money on that election that they were not legally able to do, but they did it anyway, finding a simple sentence in an attorney general's ruling from 1988. And they justified the city advocating because they had also done the same type of sessions in the run-up to the event center vote. And I disagreed with that process then, but I didn't have any outlet for it. By the time 2014 came around, I had an outlet for it, and I started videoing these meetings and was catching the city officials in their advocation and in their lies about the process. And as the swimming pool is being built right now, we can go back to those 6 videos that are posted up online on YouTube, and you will find where the city, Don Kearney, and all of these city officials, including the mayor, have constantly been telling stories. They have a different view of what they claim to be facts.
So you figured, I'm sorry, I'm trying to move this.
That's
along.
fine.
I gotta be done by noon.
Me too, so.
So you figured, you caught them advocating for issues that were gonna be on the ballot. You take issue with that, because it's illegal, at least by your interpretation. I'm not a lawyer. You know better than me. I'll take your word for it.
I've had lawyers look at it.
So you then went to a city council meeting and bitched
Yep.
to the city council. When did that meeting take place?
Wow.
Before July 2nd?
Oh yeah. I have made.
Before you were arrested?
Oh yeah. Before the 2014 vote, okay. I made when they first announced the advocational education sessions, I was there immediately and let
was it in 2014 though?
I believe so.
So like,
but I was actually my first city council appearance was in December of 2012 when we were advocating for a 2013 vote on the snow gates.
December 2012, you were speaking in favor of snow gates.
Yes.
Okay. But the one that really pissed the mayor off was the one about the advocational education.
Well, that started, yeah. That.
So you feel through and through that your arrest was political retribution. It wasn't the mayor thinking, we get complaints from all of his neighbors about this property. He's not taking any steps to be a good neighbor and address his neighbors' concerns. We have the right to arrest him for that. Do they?
Well, in fact.
Were you convicted of this?
No, I was found not guilty on all charges.
So you fought this to trial? Or
oh yeah, it cost me a lot of money.
Okay.
So it was a very expensive process to go through, and I won the whole thing. And
on what grounds did you win? What did the jury say? Or the
well, it was the judge.
Okay.
And the judge said that Mr. Danielson, if I remember this exactly right, Mr. Danielson does not have to follow the city's time frame to work on his property. He evidently enjoys working on his yard and his house, and the city can't tell him how long it should take. And if you
the issue is your neighbors are pissed off that you still haven't finished your.
Well, they were pissed off when the house was built in 1964. The same people that complained now still live in their houses. And so 4 of the previous owners of the house have been back to the house through the years. And they just can't believe that some of the neighbors are still alive because they moved because the neighbors were so horrible.
Okay. But you're so stubborn. You ain't moving.
No, I have no reason to move. I actually have some absolutely fantastic, wonderful neighbors outside of this core group that I will talk to. I will, help out at a moment's notice if they ever needed any help. In fact, some of the neighbors that are now creating problems for me are neighbors who once upon a time were very friendly with me, and we would help each other out, and I gave them things, through the years. Well, when some of that kind of dried up, then whatever the reasons, I have no idea. You know, life changes and people's attitudes change on things, and I just keep putzing away with my yard and my, you know, projects, and some people get mad because I'm always working on something. But difference doesn't make. It's my outlet.
Yeah.
So anyway, when you ask me, and maybe this is the wrap up, is when you ask me why I ended up now being so aggressively gone after, is something that we're finding all through the city of Sioux Falls, where the city of Sioux Falls is using code enforcement to punish people. And if you are not, I want to phrase this right, if you're creating a problem for the city administration in any way, shape, or form, code enforcement is the method to silence people. Now, I brought in some things here. I showed this up at City Council a few weeks ago. This is the 105-page contract of the new admin building. Compared it to the event center contract. Something that the city council members, not a single city council member studied any of this, and they voted to accept a construction manager risk for the new admin building. I'm bringing this stuff up. I was bringing up this kind of stuff about the event center and the problems with the event center, on especially the siding, because I was really watching how the siding was going on. And I have been pushing to get something understood, what was going on with the siding. And then I find out that there is no way for us as citizens to get any information about the event center. The event center was built on a contract that didn't allow for citizen oversight in any way, shape, or form. And that bothered me. So I've been asking these questions. I want to know, because I saw things when that siding was going up. I know that building is not waterproof. I know that there's problems with it. The siding was put on incorrectly. And then they question why I know it was installed incorrectly, is because I've been in the metal forming business since 1965. I was a child growing up in a metal forming shop. In fact, from my infancy, I was around a blacksmith shop. My mother's father was a blacksmith. So I understand metal forming, and I love tooling, and I used to own my own metal forming company. So I've sold metal forming equipment. I understand what's going on. And then the city attorney put a letter out, so I'm told, that forbade the city council members from talking to me, which some of them laughed at.
How can they do that?
Exactly.
Yeah. They can't.
And so I'm going through all of these processes, and so on July 1st, I was going to give an event center speech, and I got up to the lectern to grab. I didn't know about how you put a PDF up on the city's thing at that point. I'd never done that. So I brought my flash drive, and I ended up finding out I should have brought it in before 10 o'clock in the morning. All kinds of little rules, which is fine. But I'd forgotten it in my computer because I had just gotten some new information, and I updated it, and then I left it in the computer when I took off running for the meeting. Well, anyway, the next day, the arrest warrant was issued. There's a whole series of my presentations that coordinate with things that city had been doing in the background.
But they knew you were going to do that?
Yes. Well, they didn't know on the 1st of July that I was going to do that, but on the 2nd of July, right away in the morning, according to the dating on the documents, that was one of the first things they did in the morning. So you had this flash drive, you show up on Monday night, you're going to give the presentation, but you left the flash drive at home, so you just decided not to approach. Yeah, and so I went up there and I said, I'm sorry, I go to grab my flash drive, it's gone. And so, because Scott was gonna run the PDF for me, and
So then you said, sorry, I'll be back next week.
I'll be back at this other, at the next meeting. And so I went to the next meeting I could get to. And that was my plan, but instead I ended up that Tuesday sitting in jail.
Wow. But you ended up presenting your information eventually.
Yeah, I eventually did. And
They thought they might.
on the 1-year anniversary of when I was gonna do it.
Oh, you did it the next year.
Yeah, because
You did it this summer.
Yep.
Yeah. So they silenced you for a year. It worked for a year then.
Well, yeah, because I had to deal with court.
Okay.
Some deaths and some things that things that happen, and so I kind of stepped back from some of this.
Did it scare you?
Not at all.
Like if the mayor can arrest me, what he runs the police department, what else can he do? I mean, did it put the fear of Huther in you?
No, that kind of stuff never scares me. I don't know why. But I had a lot of people tell me, you gotta be really careful to do this and do that. But then I had some really good friends that said, you just have to be out there. If you aren't out there, they're winning. And so the event center, I believe, is a tip of a really big story. And I actually look at the event center as the EV5 of Sioux Falls. Because there are a lot of games that were played. In the recent My Voice letter that I submitted to the Argus Leader, talking about the event center and my problems with it. I've gotten so much positive response from that. I'm constantly, even to this day, having contractors talking to me.
You're onto something, basically.
Yeah, there's something there that, there's a lot of there.
Okay.
And our city administration doesn't want a there. So that's why I put together, this 13 points of questions based on what I've been so far told about what's going on with the event center. And this is just basic. I've spent a lifetime auditing and finding things that weren't supposed to be found.
And this is your next, kind of the holy grail for you at this point in your life is the event center?
Well, not just the event center, but I would really like to see some changes to Sioux Falls city government that are very fundamental. I don't have a problem. I started out wanting to totally and completely get rid of the home rule charter until I started studying home rule charters around the United States and seeing how we could make the home rule charter responsive to the people of South Dakota and the city of Sioux Falls. Follow U.S. Constitution, follow the state of South Dakota Constitution.
And that's a long shot.
Yes, but everything in life has to be done incrementally if it's going to stick. If you make a major change, just like the election in Kentucky yesterday, somebody's going to make a huge change and it's going to be fought. But now with the increased openness of, looking at the different media in South Dakota, now looking at what happened in Platte. Actually, in several years ago, we, through Scott Erisman, through SouthDakota.com, we exposed some underhanded things that were going on in state government.
Like?
The Jason Gant situation and Pat Powers. And that there were a lot of things that were learned in that whole process that people didn't want to do anything about to fix. And we now have the Westerhouse family There are all of these things that are going on that actually tie in there, and that's at the state level. And we have a lot of those people at the state level that actually live in Sioux Falls. So I don't know how all of this can be connected, but and maybe none of it is. But what we have is a philosophy going on that needs to be addressed. In 1973, when I was staff doing a lowly job in the state legislature, I talked to Dick Knipe, and I called him up one day and said, can you find something for me to do for the legislature? I want to go and watch the legislature. So he found me a job. And it allowed me to be out there for 2 months and watch the legislature work and see how it functioned. I testified in some things. And it was a time when kids could do those things. And so I went out and I worked in the legislature. And I've never forgotten it. I've admired those people. There were Democrats and Republicans out there that, to the day they died, I just admired them to all get out because of what they were trying to accomplish. I've had friends through the years. I probably have more Republican friends than I have Democrats.
So the philosophy's changed since then for the worse.
Yeah, I don't find, I'm totally and completely against term limits. Maybe the chief executive needs to change, but the legislature, I completely disagree with term limits.
And we didn't have them back then.
We didn't have them back then. The lobbyists
shouldn't know more than the legislators.
They shouldn't know more than the legislators. It takes a certain number of years for a legislator to begin to understand the process because it's a part-time legislature. And having known several lobbyists through the years, and very good friends with lobbyists, and they often have told me the one thing that they disagree with, and these are good lobbyists, that I hold information and use the information I believe properly, have told me time and again that the worst thing that ever happened was term limits in South Dakota, because it made the legislators rely on the lobbyists for information instead of their own bank of knowledge.
People might listen to some of this stuff and say, well, Bruce Danielson is just a conspiracy theorist.
There's no, they can think anything they want. People have thought all along and there's no way I will ever change what anybody wants to think. What good would it do?
But what makes you not a conspiracy theorist? I mean, you're suspect of government and our leaders right now.
In business, in politics, in government, in human life, I'm suspect of everything because that's the way I was raised. It's one of the reasons why I do the work that I do is because I'm suspect of everything. People hire me because I'm not afraid to ask questions. There's 5 basic questions you have to ask constantly. You learned them in journalism school. That's the who, what, when, where, why. I've added the number 6 to that is how much.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Because you always ask, and no matter what project I'm ever brought in on, I ask those 5 questions. Then I can either tell them how much it'll cost them, or I'll say, how much did it cost you? And when I look at the event center, when I look at these buildings being built, when I look at so many of the things that like the Boulevard situation in the last few days, I think this is a stupid thing. I think what's happening with this Boulevard situation is we are going to end up with a whole bunch of hard and fast rules where the common nature of people says we shouldn't do certain things, but now we're going to legislate it. Now we're going to codify things so that we can have code enforcement go out and harass more landscapers.
Well, it's codified right now.
It's codified in a very bad way. But I had an issue many, many years ago. There was another one of those things that the neighbors, one particular neighbor at the time was trying to get my front yard ripped out. Somebody had posted on my door an article, and I've kept this all these years, and it's posted in my office, where it's green grass makes a better neighbor. And what they were saying and what they were complaining about is I've heavily landscaped. I have 1,500 old city street cobblestone in my front yard. I have landscaped, I have raised beds, I have done all of this stuff because my house sits lower than everybody else's house in the neighborhood, and I did all this landscaping because I thought it was cool and it kind of fit what I wanted to eventually do with the house. Somebody posts this, so then I start getting all of these complaints, and Sioux Falls had a fantastic street engineer, just a wonderful guy. He's still around, his name's John Smith. I don't even know if he'd even remember who I was, but he came to my house at the behest of the mayor to finally settle this down in my neighborhood. And I didn't know that I was having all of this trouble until she showed up one day. And he's one of the 300 tick marks. And he and a sidekick, I have no idea who this person was, came to my house and looked at the situation, and he's looking at the front yard, and we gave him a tour. I gave him a tour of the entire property, showing him what I was doing. And he's another one of those city officials that came out and said, I don't know why I'm here. And he turned to me and he put his hand on my shoulder and goes, do we have a neighbor problem? And that seemed to be...
When was this?
Oh,
90s? In the 90s?
94, 95, somewhere back in there when I was doing all this. And
Yeah.
I said, yeah, I think so. And he explained about boulevards in Sioux Falls. That totally made sense to me. It was a simple rule he was following. This is at the time there was this big controversy about P-rock and all kinds of stuff. People were putting in their boulevards, and the city was trying to stem this issue of all of this P-rock and mulch going into the storm sewer system. Mm-hmm. Well, part of town I live in doesn't have storm sewers. We don't have curb and gutter. We don't have sidewalks. We walk on the street. And so he goes, here's what we look at. You have the crown of the street, and then you have gutters down here. So our rule is 3 foot from the center of the street on a parallel line out. If there's vegetation in that area that's causing blockage, we work with the landowner to help them understand what the problem is. And that made all the sense in the world to me. He goes, under that rule, coming across here, and we have no problem.
It's basically a height restriction.
A height restriction based on the center of the street, of the crown of the street. Not the gutter, not the sidewalk. It's
not the top of the curb.
Not the top of the curb. This is the center of the street, and the crown of the street is often higher than the curb. And so when a driver is driving along and your car is actually on a slant as it's going down the street, your eyes look out at about 4 feet above the street. And so you're looking out across. So if you have your car under control, you will see anything that's happening. Mm-hmm. And that was the simplest way to handle the situation.
That was a better approach than putting you in jail.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Working, and there's a couple things that I'm going to be bringing up in the near future on some of this. That Operation Trim is a stupid thing, and I don't have any trees that are in the boulevard. But
you think the city should cover those? Like kind of like Kermit, the city should maintain.
Why not? They do it all over the country. If the city wants to maintain a certain height restriction in the property they own. I haven't been deep into this area because it hasn't been a big problem for me. But now I just was introduced to something the other day. The city is threatening fines on people that don't even have trees in their boulevards.
what.
They're sending letters out telling them they're gonna fine them if they don't trim their trees, and they go out there and go, we don't have any trees.
So they're just getting wrong address on
Yeah.
the mailer? If you,
And
if you know, I'd like to do a story on that.
that's, this boulevard thing is the city, every time the mayor goes out and does another one of these PSAs on turn your neighbor in, then all of a sudden, City Hall gets flooded, and the city then can generate fees and fines based on these neighbor retributions.
So these fueling neighbor disputes in an attempt to
Generate fees.
money.
Yep.
And people might say, oh, that seems like a stretch, but then you could probably turn around and say, well, look at all the other money grabs.
That's right.
Public parking, public transit, pool fees.
And I will point blank tell you the city of Sioux Falls is broke. The city of Sioux Falls, based on what they're doing, when we spend 30% of our CIP paying interest payments, and we're hiring people to manage these things, and we're doing staffing of these departments to go out and collect more fees. We're generating more fees at an indoor swimming pool. Now they're complaining that they can't raise the $1 million for the overruns that the indoor pool is going to create on their budget every year, so we have to raise fees. And this is a very common thing if you study municipal and state governments around the country, that we are now generating more revenue out of fees than we're generating out of taxation. So in other words, we're taking the government that used to be run by taxation and turning it into a user fee government.
Why is that bad?
Because we're a social government. The government builds what's an infrastructure. We all pay in to build the streets. We all pay in to build the city halls. We all pay to build the superhighways. The military. So all of these things are out there. And we do that as a social network. And those people who are fortunate enough to find a way to make $1 gazillion, these people have a greater responsibility to pay back in. Because if it wasn't for your taxes and my taxes and everybody's taxes, making it possible for them to work.
Yeah, I get you. So, is it that...
it's Keynesian economics,
is it that, Hoosier hasn't lowered taxes for anybody.
No.
So it's not like we're not paying the same level of taxes, if not more. It's just the fees have gone up so drastically. I mean, it's...
you bring up Mayor Huther. When he started his administration till now, we're somewhere $250 million to $300 million more in debt than when he took office. And what's he done? He's gone out and built a bunch of buildings. We also have a school district that's gone out now and built a whole bunch of buildings. Instead of repurposing, trying to find better ways to do things, we're now borrowing money so that we can pay bonds. And the only people that come out in a deal like that are the bondholders. The city of Sioux Falls is poor because now we've lost opportunities. Because we no longer have the money to do the basic social things that we used to do. Government has a social contract, whether you want to, however you want to call it, but we have built a government in this country that is based on the tenet of no landed aristocracy. And now we're changing the system to Randian, Ayn Rand philosophies of it's me first and to heck with you. And I know some of the, when we would finally post any of this, a lot of the people that talk to me would probably go, they'll start arguing with me, and I don't care. I am a small D Democrat that has firmly believed in the age of enlightenment and the ability to come forward through that with the people in control of the process. And whether you like the answers the people give, who cares? I don't, because that's politics. We don't stack the deck against people just because you can.
I'm gonna have to finish up here.
Yeah, what time is it? I gotta.
1:45.
Okay. God, sorry.
It's okay. We could go on all day. So you an independent contractor as a data miner, or do you work for a company?
No, I do independent wherever somebody needs me.
So I could describe you as a
Independent contractor.
contractor who does data work.
Yeah, data mining,
Data
right?
mining.
Software. No, it's whatever. I've been doing data security work since 1985, in one way or another. When we used to have to move the big data tapes and platter packs, these big platter packs that were this big around and stacked that high and held 10 megabyte of data.
Wow. Okay.
Come on, Soda Pop, let's go. Come on, let's go. Come on.